2 girls, 1 cup. Wait, sorry, that's not right. 2 bots, 1 wrench was a video game experiment you probably haven't heard of before. If that does indeed apply to you, it's not difficult to understand why that's the case. 2 bots, 1 wrench was, for all intents and purposes, a predecessor to Portal 2, albeit a predecessor that bears very little resemblance to anything that would eventually be created for the final build of Portal 2. But it's nonetheless crucially important to the Portal 2 we all know and love. The title of this video probably has you wondering, how was this strangely named game the ancestor to Portal 2? To understand why this game is so important to the development of Portal 2, it's first important to understand why the game exists in the first place. You've likely noticed that I mentioned this mystery game was created as an experiment, and that was no accident. In November of 2007, shortly after the release of the Orange Box, Valve's production pipeline would be completely shut down. CEO Gabe Newell had come up with an idea known as the Directed Design Experiments, where Valve would shut down all productions and turn the company into what was essentially a game development playground. Developer Tom Leonard, responsible for feats such as many of the Source Engine fundamental frameworks, would be set to lead the project. Valve went radio silent for around 3 to 4 months, as small teams within Valve started to collaborate on experiments and projects that they believed would be interesting or otherwise innovative enough to inspire the studio's next big project. In February of 2008, the company gathered for a quote, science fair at a local movie theater in Bellevue, Washington to show off what they had created. Only 5 of these experiments are publicly known. The first was Blobulator, a liquid simulation experiment for the Source Engine which would later be reused in part for the gel mechanic in Portal 2. The second experiment was related to the development of modular AI, where the team developed combine soldier prototypes that would collect, quote, upgrades from fallen comrades to enhance themselves. The third experiment was 2 bots, 1 wrench, but we'll get to that shortly. The fourth experiment was time, which was built off the existing Portal technology by adding time as an entirely separate mechanic to consider. Check out Portal Reloaded. Finally, the fifth experiment was the most famous and most evocative of them all, fstop. This is the experiment that would lead into the direct development of what would eventually become the next Valve game. Shortly after its conception, many aspects of the previously mentioned experiments would all eventually mold into Portal 2, with the exception of time. Cool, but how does 2 bots 1 wrench fit into any of this? And why even write a full-length video about it? Because video game history is cool! The 2 bots 1 wrench experiment was led by a team given the nickname the Elders of Zion, a name given as the majority of the team was largely composed of Jewish members. Individuals of note in this team were Eric Wolpaw, Ido Magal, Matt Wood, and Alon Ruskin. Wolpaw is of particular note as he would go on to be one of the main writers for Portal 2. If you hadn't figured it out already, the name of the project was a play in the classic wait, maybe not classic, unforgettable? Oh wait, I've got it. Infamous video, 2 Girls, 1 Cup. Of course, the game itself had literally nothing to do with it whatsoever, and instead has 2 sentient robots with the player presumably wielding a wrench, although this is never actually seen. Essentially, nothing exists online either visually or factually about the game, and the only concrete proof of its existence are a set of 3 YouTube videos ripped from the final hours of Portal 2, including the final hours itself.
A lubricant machine! I could use some lubricant.
The team's experiment was simple, to push forward storytelling in games by having AI react and behave according to actions that a player would undertake in a game or an in-game event. Sometimes these AIs would even interact with each other, creating naturalistic and often comedic interactions.
Danger. Crane overhead.
Caution, you're an idiot.
Given this was simply just an experiment, the game itself was largely built off of Half-Life 2. So much so that the majority of the maps used in the game were either original or heavily modified Nova Prospect maps. The robots themselves had a quite unique personality to each of their characters. While neither were ever given official names, we're going to give them nicknames for the sake of this video. The first is Grunty, the squarish, gruff robot voiced by Valve artist Richard Lord. The second one is Hattie, a more feminine, roundish robot that likes to wear hats. They also really like to talk about urine.
Vast quantities of urine.
Urine?
Another urine barrel might contain a bit of urine.
What is wrong with you?
Within the videos shown on YouTube, the bots like to interact with the world itself and with each other, often making witty commentary or giving each other a high five.
Up high!
Yeah.
Now, just to rewind a little bit. Following the presentation of the directed design experiments, Gabe Newell would end up asking the team who created fstop to visit him in his office, where he asked producer Joshua Wire and his team if they'd be willing to adopt fstop into a Portal prequel. Of course, Portal 2 would eventually end up being a sequel instead, and incorporate many elements seen in some of the directed design experiments. So, how did 2 Bots 1 Wrench impact Portal 2's development? Despite such an objectively simple tech demo, nearly every aspect of the experiment would end up being repurposed, including the rudimentary and crude models developed for the robot personalities. In early builds of Portal 2, the developers wanted to make the game much less sterile and much more lively as compared to its predecessor. For a while, the objective of the developers was to somehow create a companion to the player. Harnessing the technology created with 2 Bots 1 Wrench, the idea of the personality cores was born. At one point in Portal 2's development, there were originally 6 personality cores the player could find and interact with. One idea Valve toyed with was to have these interact with each other if they were ever in each other's presence. This was a direct inspiration from Grunty and Hattie's behavior in the experiment, but playtesting would eventually lead Valve to scrap the main 6 cores and replace them with just one, Wheatley. Despite the cut of core-to-core interaction, Wheatley would still end up reacting to actions that the player would take in the game, much like the bots.
Bless your little primate brain. I'm not actually in the room with you, am I? Technology.
Fun fact, Wheatley's placeholder voice lines were also done by Richard Lord, the same guy who voiced Grunty and Hattie.
Oh, good. You're back. I thought maybe you'd try to escape without me. Pop a portal over there.
Do you know who sat at this desk?
Who?
The warden.
No.
It's true.
Speaking of the bots, you may have noticed something special about these two. Maybe you even recognize them. While it has never been explicitly confirmed as to whether the bots from 2 Bots 1 Wrench are the direct inspiration for Atlas and Peabody, the signs are definitely there. For example, Grunty bears an almost rugged and boxy appearance while maintaining a low-pitched voice with a masculine persona. Hattie, on the other hand, is more roundish and has a high-pitched voice with a feminine personality. Notice the similarities? These are traits that are almost identical to those of Atlas and Peabody, even including the ability to high-five and wear hats, even though the latter would be a complete failure in Portal 2. Grunty also appears to be the more immature and, quote, stupider one, much like Atlas.
Look, I'm a human lady. I'm using the toilet.
Oh, bravo. Too true.
The writing in 2 Bots 1 Wrench also bears remarkable similarities to comedic bits and interactions seen in Portal 2, in no small part due to Eric Wolpaw writing both.
Oh, that's a rather shabby crate.
Oh my god, it's horrible.
Ah, I accidentally looked at it again.
Stop looking at it.
I just looked down. I do not recommend it. I've just done it again.
While Portal 2 would largely take from fstop with some pieces of content remaining from the original tech demo like Old Aperture, it's valuable to take a look at the less obvious and seemingly less insignificant things that led to the Portal 2 we know and love. Valve certainly remembers it though, given that you could actually use their heads for avatar models in Steam VR, which makes it nice because it means that they're not lost to time.
This thing still works, unfortunately.
Would Portal 2 be as good as it was without 2 Bots 1 Wrench? There's no definitive answer to that question, but it's something interesting to think about. Who knows, maybe one day we'll all get the chance to play the full tech demo and experience it ourselves. If you liked this video and found it interesting, leave a like, and subscribe if you want to see more. I say this because I'm trying to upload long-form videos more often, and I've got a lot planned in the near future, so stay tuned, and make sure you have notifications enabled, because guess what?
I put the toilet seat up, in case anyone cares.